Tonight, after weeks of celebrity appearances, get out the vote appeals, and more than 50 million early votes already cast, and with just 7 days to go until the polls close for good on the 2024 election, all eyes are on Washington, D.C., where Kamala Harris will make her closing argument. Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight live in Washington, where Vice President Harris will very shortly give a major speech, perhaps the most important of her career, billed as her closing argument in the 2024 election, in a very pointed location. I think it's fair to say that no one knows more about closing arguments than Kamala Harris. Remember, before she was the Democratic presidential nominee, before she was vice president and a U.S. senator and California attorney general, she was a prosecutor. It was how she became a rising star in Democratic politics. When you look at her bio, her tenure as a prosecutor is what stands out. It's what she emphasizes when she says her only client in her early career was the people. And thanks to the show Law and Order, we know some things about how the scales of justice balance and teeter in prosecutors' hands. The legal drama, with its iconic opening title and sequence and 20 seasons worth of content, has shown millions of Americans how prosecutors go about making deals and plea bargains, the preparation of witnesses and evidence, and perhaps most dramatically, how they land their closing arguments when representing the people. When you prosecute a case, generally what you do is make your opening argument, lay out the facts, and then you present your evidence at trial. Then in the closing, you explain to the jury how the evidence backs up the narrative you laid out in the opening. It's something VP Harris has done multiple times in her career, including as a presidential candidate. When officially announcing her presidential campaign, she spelled it out like this.
The freedom not just to get by, but get ahead. The freedom to be safe from gun violence. The freedom to make decisions about your own body. We choose a future where no child lives in poverty, where we can all afford health care, where no one is above the law.
Now, you can't be a prosecutor without talking about the law, and Harris is making her closing arguments in a very significant place, the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. Now, the last time that you probably even saw the Ellipse was this dark moment in January 2021.
After this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Trump incited a mob to ransack the Capitol on January 6, 2021. He refers to convicted rioters as hostages. He calls what you see on the screen a day of love. More than 1,500 people have been criminally charged by federal prosecutors in connection with breaching the Capitol that day. Trump also faces federal and state criminal charges for trying to subvert the election. But Kamala Harris is not coming to Washington tonight to relitigate January 6th. She's coming to litigate Trump and his vision for the country versus her own. She's doing it in a way that is historic, significant, and fitting, really. It's a reminder of what happened that day under very different leadership and how we can avoid repeating it, because it won't just be a repeat. The next time will be much, much worse. Joining me now are my colleagues and friends, Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes. Thank you both for being here and coming in a little early, doing a little early duty. Rachel, I want to go to you first. What do you think of the history that's being made tonight, the choice by Vice President Harris to go to the Ellipse to make this speech, and what you expect to hear?
I don't know about what I expect to hear. I mean, we all know there's excerpts around. We've been told by the campaign what to expect in terms of overall themes. We've seen her on the stump doing so many interviews, so many appearances, so many rallies. I mean, we can kind of surmise contextually what she might say tonight, but I do think tonight is different. And I gotta say, Joy, just as a citizen, I'm grateful that she is going to the Ellipse, so that a new big political important thing happens on the Ellipse to supplant what our memory is of that place. To have had, as you just showed it, to have had a U.S. president standing there, you know, in that historic place with the backdrop of the White House in front of a crowd, telling them to go physically menace one of the branches of government in order to subvert the Constitution and install him without benefit of the people's consent. That ought to be wiped off the historical timeline. And she could have given this speech tonight from anywhere. She could have done, you know, she could have done this on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. You know, you could pick a lot of places that would have a lot of historical significance. But to do it there is to say, you know what? It was not a proper point in American history to have a president here doing that. We are going to move on and do something different than that. This place will mean something different. We will effectively reconsecrate this ground for the Constitution and for this republic, and I will lead you as a president who respects both of those things. And I don't know if it's going to be a good speech. I don't know if it's going to be a turning point in the campaign, but I'm just grateful as a citizen that a big speech from the Ellipse is going to mean something different than the way he left it.
Yeah, and I mean, Chris, reclaiming that ground, I think, is a big reason to be there, right, in this moment, because I still can remember, I can still take myself right back to that day of being on TV with you both, with you guys, and all day folks were on TV talking about the trauma that was produced in that exact same space, right? Because Donald Trump, who was at the time a sitting president of the United States, used that hallowed ground, that ground that was built by enslaved hands, that has represented so much for our country, and he used it to launch the insurrection. The speech he gave from there was, if you don't fight, you're going to lose your country. I'm going to march down to the Capitol with you, and I'll walk with you. And we know now from the January 6th Commission that he wanted to get into the car, into the Beast, and drive over there so that he could be a part of the insurrection and stage the coup in person. Like, that's the memories that I think we now have of the Ellipse, which has meant so much more in our history. And she's reclaiming that ground tonight. That seems pretty significant.
I think it is. I hadn't even really thought of those terms until Rachel was just saying it, but it is amazing how much I have a sort of pejorative association with the word the Ellipse, because the only time and only context we utter it is as the site for this, essentially the kind of early stages of the insurrection. The other thing I think that is striking here, and this has been true of Kamala Harris as a candidate for the 100 days that she's campaigned as a nominee, is that, you know, one of the challenges in the modern media environment that's so fractured and balkanized is just attention. And this is the thing that Donald Trump has a sort of feral genius for. It's been the thing, his sort of competitive advantage, to be honest. And when the Harris campaign has created these kind of moments of focus, these kind of set pieces, when she was giving her speech at the DNC and when she had the debate, and maybe tonight, when she has been able to sort of create all eyes on her and get focus, she has delivered. She has been an incredibly effective communicator in those situations. Part of the struggle, I think, is in the modern media environment, getting those moments of focus. I think it's a really smart campaign decision to take a big swing here. I mean, we saw, in some ways, a sort of the kind of double-edged sword that is Donald Trump's attentional obsession at MSG, right? Because that got a lot of attention, but it was pretty negative attention, rightly so. I mean, just an insult comic going after everyone from Palestinians to Jewish folks to Puerto Ricans to black people. There was a joke about Travis Kelce wanting to kill Taylor Swift. I mean, I just keep discovering new disgusting things that we're saying. But where she has had the ability in this fractured media environment to focus the attention of the nation, we have seen it in the polling, we've seen it in the reaction, right? That she has really responded to those moments, and people have responded to her abilities to communicate in a really strong way. I mean, in fact, they wanted another debate for exactly that reason. And Donald Trump didn't for exactly that reason. And in some ways, she did the town hall. This is another chance to sort of remind everyone who these two individuals are and what their contrasting visions are.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, she really has, the campaign, Rachel, has done a really good job of competing for that attention economy. She's done these sort of iconic events, obviously being in Houston, hometown of Beyonce, with Beyonce and 2/3 of Destiny's Child, you know, all the celebrities she's brought to the table. That isn't exactly new. I mean, Barack Obama did that, and he did that in a very similar way of using celebrity in a really specific way. But to me, she's doing something in addition to that. I mean, you know, there is a simultaneous, she's going to do an event tomorrow night. There's events going on in Georgia with more celebrities. She's doing celebrity. But at the same time, I covered her 2019 campaign when she launched in 2019. And it's interesting, the themes were the same. She launched as Kamala Harris for the people. Her first ad said she's going to prosecute Donald Trump. She talked about him being lawless and she being the candidate of law and order. And so there's a way in which she's co-opted a lot of themes that are not normally associated with Democrats. And law and order is one of them. She's used that prosecutorial theme again in this campaign, but to incredibly dramatic and successful effect. Like, she really has captured the entertainment and the information economy, as well as, obviously, fought to, weirdly enough, that she would have to fight to even with the polls with somebody whose first job in politics was president of the United States and whose job before that was being on The Apprentice, but such is the world for women, and particularly women of color. But she's done a good job of that, and this feels like an opportunity to do it again.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I think that what Chris was saying about competing for attention, first of all, Chris has a very, very good book on that exact topic coming out that I highly recommend to everybody. It's great, one of the best things I've read in years. But at this point, in the way it applies to this moment, I feel like it's actually just really illuminating. Like, why is it that Trump can capture so much attention while not doing anything valuable? Well, he captures attention because he's very transgressive and does incredibly offensive stuff all the time, and is sort of wild and feral and out of control, and so therefore you have to pay attention to him. Kamala Harris is a disciplined politician who is proposing a moderate, progressive agenda for the country without doing anything crazy. Nobody ever fears that she's going to bite the head off a bat, right?
Joy, I don't know if there's a majority in the country or in the swing states for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. We're going to find that out. I feel quite certain there's a majority of just on the forced referendum, like, do you want to think more about Donald Trump or less? That there is genuinely a majority in the country. I don't know if that's going to be the votes, but that is part of the pitch here.
Yeah, I mean, there's an eye roll to it at this point, right? His act is getting old, and that line, new generation of leadership, I think that's key, because when you talk to younger people, they're not as partisan, and they're frustrated with the idea that a lot of what we spend time talking about, when they watch us on YouTube, they don't really watch cable news, but wherever they're watching, they're just annoyed about the fact that Democrats and Republicans are constantly fighting each other and not solving their problems, and I think that's really important that she got out. So just now to go back to her disciplined campaign person. Because, yes, this was a much more effluent speech. It was a different kind of Kamala, but then she got back down to business. She said, I'm a new generation of leader. I'm not going to ignore somebody who doesn't agree with me. Even if you didn't vote for me, I'm going to listen to you and listen to all the ideas. Then she got to the stuff that's important, reducing costs. She said Donald Trump is going to do another $1 trillion in tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations. He's going to pay for it with a 20% national sales tax. One of we had Michael Tyler on earlier on my show when you guys were all with me. There's a job the comms director wants her to do. One of them is to get out and get people to understand this national sales tax, his tariff plan. She also says that he is looking to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which will throw tens of millions of Americans off their health insurance. That is a big deal to people who may not be paying a ton of attention, but might be tonight. She's talking about he's delivering tax cuts to billionaire donors. I'll deliver tax cuts to working people and the middle class. She also talked about making sure that working people, that dreamers would get an opportunity. I haven't heard her talk about dreamers. She talked about a pragmatic approach to immigration. So when she starts going through and ticking off the things that she would do, she talked about making it so that people could finally afford their first home and ending price gouging on groceries. I noted that because that is one of the big beefs that people who are open to Trump have, is how much things cost. So she got right to the idea that this new generation of ideas can help make your life affordable, and particularly for millennial voters and Trump open sort of Gen Zers, that is their big issue, the cost of things.
And that sort of substantive policy part of the speech, I want to talk about one other agenda in there in just a second. But this has been the message on the paid advertising. Like, that is the stuff they are hammering day in, day out. If you watch American football games, as I do, you get a lot of that from both the super PAC associated with and the Kamala Harris campaign as well. But also, I thought, Rachel, this idea of sort of democratic debate and disagreement, that like we're going to not agree, I'm not going to, people are going to vote for me or not vote for me, I'm going to be everyone's president. And this line about, she had in slide number 3 here, we're talking about the enemies list. And she kept talking about like, that's not, like, I want people to say different things. I understand that we're a fractious country, that people don't all agree, but I'm not going to have an enemies list. Take a listen.
So look, in less than 90 days, either Donald Trump or I will be in the Oval Office. Okay? On day one, and on day one, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list full of priorities of what I will get done for the American people.
This is a theme, Rachel, just like he's thinking about himself and he wants vengeance, and I'm thinking about you, and I'm going to try to actually do stuff. And that really is that's where the kind of the substance and the policy and the character stuff come together, and this is the core argument.
Yeah, and you know, good politicians always make time during their campaign to say, I will work for you even if you don't vote for me. I'll be the senator for all of Pennsylvania, you know, or I'll be a president for all Americans. They always do some version of that. But in this environment, with Trump saying we have an enemy within against whom we need to use not just physical force, but U.S. military force, right? I mean, there's a Republican candidate for schools chief in North Carolina right now who's a like super Trumpy schools chief Republican candidate. And she says that what she wants is publicized, televised executions of people like Barack Obama, right? Like this is the vibe that's coming from MAGA world, including their elected officials and their candidates for the highest offices. And so in that kind of environment, you can't just say, I'm going to be a president for everyone. Like, it's not enough. And so Vice President Harris tonight said, you know, I don't relish a country where we don't have debate, where we don't have arguments. We want arguments. We want debates. We believe, and I believe, that when people disagree about things and we can fairly work it out amongst ourselves, and we can each hear it, we can hear all sides of things. We can disagree vigorously. We'll come up with better policies. And not only will I listen to you, but I will not lock you up. And I would like you to have a seat at the table. And I mean, it's actually, I got to say, I bristle at it a little bit. I just think, like, do you want people to have a seat at the table who are going to use their seat at the table to dismantle American democracy and install a dictatorship that never leaves? I don't know if they get a seat at the table, but she's saying they will, and that is a you know, Gerald Ford's pardon kind of message. That is a let's end this division kind of message. That is a it's not an us and them America kind of message. And I think it's, you know, maybe she's got smarter, better angels than I do, but that is a very moderate, responsible, big-hearted message that I think is probably a good strategic choice.
Yes, and moderation in tone and approach is a key theme here, and it's reflected by the fact that polling has shown people assess her as more liberal than she sort of actually is, right? It has a lot to do with her gender and her race, and people sort of the framework through which people view that. There's the one more policy thing I just want to hit, because I think it's probably the most, in some ways, revolutionary seismic policy proposal of the campaign. It's not gotten as much attention as probably deserved, but she talked about the idea of Medicare paying for home care for elder folks. This is something that I just think tens of millions, if not more, Americans are dealing with in some way or the other. And it really would completely transform and revolutionize the way that people can conceive of care, the idea of like drawing down your savings so you can get onto Medicaid, which people do all the time, which is just a central financial challenge people face. Here she is talking about this home care agenda, slide number 5, about Medicare paying for that. Take a listen.
Currently, if you need home care and you don't have some money to hire someone, you and your family need to deplete your savings to qualify for help. That's just not right. So we're going to change the approach and allow Medicare to cover the cost of home care so seniors can get the help and care they need in their own homes. Now, Donald Trump has a different approach. He tried to cut Medicare and Social Security every year he was president. Look, I believe that when people have worked hard their entire life, they deserve to retire with the benefits they have earned.
So, you know, the way this works now, home care is through Medicaid, which is a means-tested program, right, originally designed for folks in poverty. What you have to do is become poor to get the Medicaid money. I mean, that's literally the incentive structure when she says deplete savings. It's not a universal social insurance program like Medicare and Social Security. This would be transformative on that score and is wildly popular in the polling I've seen, Joy.
Yeah, and look, I have two friends that are going through this right now, you know, and we know a lot of people. And look, if you look at her poll, if you look at that latest ABC poll, for instance, it breaks down the way that she's performing, including in swing states and nationally, and you break it down by age. The generation she's performing the weakest with is my generation, Generation X. And so this is a message that is directed right at Generation X, who are a large part of the sandwich generation, and as well as older millennials who are now getting into that generation as well. If you are in your 50s, you know, at this point, or late 40s, you might be caring both for children and still supporting children who, let's say, are in college, who you're still supporting financially, but also supporting an elder or dealing with elder care. It's incredibly expensive. Or if you have an injured family member that needs to go onto Medicaid, that the system is not designed for you. And it's so expensive that it's breaking people financially. And so I think this is an important sort of, as you said, it doesn't get as much attention, but it goes right to the amygdala of people for whom cost is the thing that's making them undecided, for whom the spending and the pressure on them, particularly after COVID, which made even work harder and more difficult to obtain, that's who she's talking to. Because I think what she's understanding is a lot of the undecided are financial voters. They're voters who vote based on how much things cost them and who they assess as better for their pockets. And in this sense, she's saying, if you are in that sandwich generation, if you are Gen X or an older millennial, I'm the one who's going to make things costless and make it possible for you to be able to afford both elder care and child care.
All right. Joy Reid and Rachel Maddow, both of whom have pulled overtime tonight, and I am incredibly appreciative and grateful for you pulling overtime with me. It's a great joy to do that. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president.
I understand what Trump said. With that comment, he's looking at the blight of the houses that have not been torn down or anything like that, the abandoned factories that have yet to have been cleaned up.
Why didn't he say that?
Donald Trump, at his age, he's had the eloquent speaking sessions of his life and all that.
You're saying
he doesn't give a right now.
We're past prime eloquence, Donald Trump.
Right.
Wait, when were we ever in prime eloquence, Donald Trump? When was that? When was that time? For the past 8 years, Daily Show correspondent Jordan Klepper has traveled the country, attending dozens of MAGA rallies and interviewing hundreds of Trump supporters. And in 8 years, a lot has changed. Trump himself is more unfocused and fatigued and bizarre. He toggles back and forth between overt fascism and color commentary about sharks, Hannibal Lecter, and Arnold Palmer's genitalia. That's what's really happening. Parallel to that, shall we call it evolution, Trump's supporters have become more extreme themselves.
Back-to-back catastrophic hurricanes can't tell me that they didn't have a hand in that.
The Democrats are controlling the weather?
The government.
So if Trump gets in office, he'll have control over the weather.
Well, they will pass on the torch, I assume.
I have some people coming up saying Trump's a time traveler.
I haven't heard.
Wait, I haven't heard the time traveler one.
He turned his head before the bullet hit his ear.
So people
Tracks.
It does. So he came back.
Tracks 100%.
You know what I mean?
He'd already been there once before.
If that's the case, he must know that he won because he decided to run for president again.
I think he knows he's going to win this time.
That's why he's so angry about the idea, like, if I don't win, it's because you guys cheated because I'm a time traveler. I've seen it all. Is this the kind of stuff you're usually hearing when you're...
Oh, yes.
We can't be the most far out theory of the day.
No, you're not.
No. How much for the Kamala toilet paper?
Democrats control the weather. And Donald Trump is a time traveler. Now, Trump rallies have always been an ecosystem unto themselves, but this year they really feel like an ecosystem on Mars.
I was curious what news sources you guys follow and which ones you do trust.
I ask questions from my Lord above.
Yeah.
And honestly, I get a lot of stuff from X.
So God and Twitter.
The Daily Show's Jordan Klepper has been attending Trump rallies for nearly a decade, and he's still standing. While some things about Trump rallies remain the same in 2024, others are different, like J.D. Vance is now on the ticket, and Elon Musk has joined the MAGAverse, and Democrats can now control the weather, and Donald Trump is a time traveler. Joining me now is The Daily Show's Jordan Klepper. His new special, The Daily Show Presents Jordan Klepper Fingers the Pulse. Rally Together, thanks for making me say that, Jordan, is available now on Paramount Plus as well as Comedy Central's website and The Daily Show's YouTube channel. It's basically everywhere. Jordan, I want to get all your thoughts.
Sure. Let's get into it.
So, you know, you're a seasoned vet of MAGAland.
I've been there. I've been to the world. I bought the T-shirt. I've tried to return the T-shirt. They don't take kindly. They just give me another one, take it back.
Size.
Yeah, different size, larger and larger.
Long-sleeved. This one has a crew neck, not a V-neck. Jamel Bouie writes in the New York Times, far from showing strength, he's writing about the MSG, the Madison Square Garden rally.
Yep.
But he says, far from showing strength, the Madison Square Garden rally showed that the MAGA movement is a spent and exhausted force, even if it is not yet defeated. I sort of wonder, as you go to these events, whether that comports with the reality that you're witnessing. I mean, does it feel like a movement that has lost steam, that is more carnival than it is political movement?
Well, I do feel like the circus has come through town many times now, and people are still coming out to see the three-armed man, still telling themselves lies that that's not a prosthetic, that is a third arm indeed. But we are seeing less and less people there. The diehards, they are there. We're seeing a lot of people who have been to 93 rallies, and they keep going to more and more rallies. It's like the deadheads. The deadheads are still going to deadhead.
Right.
And I think hearing those details about the MSG rally, that's what I saw as well. It's impressive to fill an arena, but filling an arena full of New Jersey folks isn't going to win an election. Just ask the Jets. I think what I saw at that event was Donald Trump looking small. And it's the people that he brought up with him.
Yeah.
And if you're presenting to the world your final case, and the best thing you have to offer is Dr. Phil and Hulk Hogan, these D-listers who are out there, and just anger and bad jokes that don't play, and jokes that are offensive and racist and feel like mad scribblings on a bathroom wall by mediocre men. Well, if that's your final offer, that's your party, that's your team, what do you got? And so I see that, and it's 18,000 people, but somehow he made 18,000 people and the whole event and the whole party seem tiny.
Yeah. You know, we were talking before the segment began about the comedian who made the most racist, garbage comments at the Garden rally. And you were saying you know this guy, Tony Hinchcliffe. Am I getting that right, Control Room? Am I getting that right, Jordan?
Tony Hinchcliffe, yeah. I don't know him personally.
But you're familiar with his work, right? Like this guy is not some sort of, this wasn't a secretly or a surprisingly virulent set that he did.
No, this is, I think if you're hiring Tony Hinchcliffe or asking him to be a part of your show, this is what you're expecting. It's not as if anybody's shocked that Hulk Hogan ripped his shirt off. That's what he does. Tony Hinchcliffe told roast jokes. He's a roast comedian who tells those types of jokes. I think what's shocking is that these things are usually happening in a small Austin comedy club or in the back rooms at MAGA events. But this happened in Madison Square Garden, and in front of him it said Trump Vance. And suddenly the secret's out.
Yeah.
It's laughable to me that folks like Donald Trump didn't know what they were getting there.
Pretend.
Of course, they pretend. We're just joking. We didn't know. No, you know. I know. And I'm not vetting this whole thing.
You know, we're told, for people who aren't at these rallies and aren't familiar with Tony's sets down in Austin, that this is the kind of stuff that resonates with young men, that this is part of the Manoverse, that like Dana White and Hulk Hogan may seem passé or sort of like weird sideshows, but this is what's ginning up a whole generation of young men who feel marginalized. When you talk, you're there at the rallies, you see who's going, you see what this sort of enthusiasm level is like. Is that assessment of the merit or the value of these people at those events?
I mean,
correct?
This excites some men. Not all men. I mean, kind of the worst men. Not to be pejorative about it, but if this is what gets you going, I think you need a hobby, learn how to play guitar. I do have empathy for.
But you see this resonating with young men at those MAGA rallies.
Yes, there is a world. I think MAGA rallies have evolved. Perhaps that's devolved might be a better terminology there. But part of the excitement at a MAGA rally is the rebellious nature. Rebelling against what? I think sometimes that's very ill-defined. But people like the trolling elements. They buy T-shirts to make people angry.
Kamala Harris toilet paper.
They want Kamala Harris toilet paper. It's more akin to a rebellious teenager who wants to TP the front yard.
Right.
And that energy exists. And so they want somebody to say something untoward. And that, of course, might play with a dirty, dark joke like that. But it's so surprising to see it when you're like, oh, but this is not the back rooms at some comedy club.
Yeah.
This is somebody asking for your vote and your support.
Wait, yeah, and you also want to win over Latino men, Latino women, the Latino vote, period. This isn't going to help you do that,
No.
in addition to being just explicitly racist. You mentioned the kind of like trolling the libs aspect to all of this. And we played some sound of these Trump supporters saying, with straight faces, Donald Trump may be a time traveler and or, Democrats can control the weather. Is that, you're up close with these folks. Is that more sort of like trolling the libs, owning the libs and saying outlandish things? Or do you genuinely think that kind of disinformation is like implanted itself in their brains?
I think at that point, it's not about what the truth of that situation is. They're not seeking truth, they're seeking comfort. And so the weather conversation is them, they've morphed their worldview around this idea that everything is us versus them. And so literally air is now something that has to be them and not us. And so it's not a discussion over what they truly believe, because at that point it's almost so muddy. They believe most in winning, most in Donald Trump, and so they comport these worldviews to that. And Donald Trump gives them just enough rope to hang themselves in the proverbial bad information world.
Do you, when you have conversations, because, whatever happens on November 5th, the country presumably is going to stay the United States of America. And I wonder, what is it when you get out of a cult? Like, there's certain ways to bring people back into society. And I wonder if there are any sort of devices or tricks you've learned to help, people who are so deeply embedded in the cult of MAGA come back, or at least see a light at the end of that tunnel that may be, in fact, the truth. Is there a way to approach these folks?
The short answer, no. But
really, well,
I'm not seeing a lot of change. But to be fair, I'm not going out there trying to change people's mind.
Right.
I will say, though, in this special that I did, we brought somebody, Edward, who I'd seen at a bunch of rallies, been to 93 Trump rallies. We brought him to a Kamala Harris rally because he had never been. And from his perspective, everybody at a Kamala Harris rally is a paid actor. They don't believe anything they talk about. We bring him to a Kamala event, and he's critical, he's trolly, but he's a good-natured person. I truly like Edward. He feels like your uncle. And over time, through exposure, through engaging in conversations, and through talking one-on-one, he didn't change his mind, but he at least thought, there's a movement here. It's not my movement, but there's a movement here. Because it's so hard.
People who are not lizard people.
They're not lizard people. They're real people. You talk to them. The internet is not a real place. If you look at somebody face to face and want to troll them, it's super hard. It's so easy to troll from the confines of the internet, or even the quaintness of MSG if it's just your pals around it. If you're face to face with people, I truly believe you can connect and help that person. And I think that's built into a lot of this MAGA-ness. What is the phrase? Like, dictators prey on loneliness.
Yeah.
And we see that. So I think you have to deal with the loneliness, and that may provide a path out of that into some light.
That is very, very wise and very reflective, Jordan. I shouldn't sound.
I've been through the fire, Alex. I've been through the fire.
Jordan Klepper with The Daily Show. Thank you again, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
Great work out there, man. Thank you for what you're doing. The Daily Show presents Jordan Klepper, Fingers the Pulse, Rally Together, and yes, that is available on Paramount Plus. Thanks, Jordan. It's great to see you.
Tonight, as Kamala Harris makes her closing argument that it's time to turn the page away from the divisiveness that led to January 6th, I want to make two important notes. One of the officers who was attacked on that day will be back on the job at Kamala Harris's speech tonight, near where Donald Trump fanned the anger of a crowd and so close to where he stood at the front of a police line at the Capitol. his helmet ripped off by one rioter, another blasting him with pepper spray as he was crushed with a stolen police shield. Rioters trying to stop the certification of the election. But also today, one of the loudest voices of election denialism, known agitator Steve Bannon, has been released from prison. This picture, taken by our next guest, capturing his early moments of freedom. It comes in the closing days of a campaign that has been so strongly defined by the issue of democracy, and with questions about whether he'll head straight to a Trump rally in Pennsylvania to further fan the flames. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is here with me in studio. Also with me, New York Times national reporter Jeremy Peters, who spoke to Steve Bannon this morning after his release, and the officer I mentioned who will be working the speech tonight, Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges, who is joining in his personal capacity, not on behalf of the department. And we'll talk to Officer Hodges in just a moment. But Jeremy, because you were outside that federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, when Bannon was released, I wonder if what he said to you suggests he is not going to go quietly for the next 7 days or beyond.
I would not expect him to go very quietly. In fact, within several hours of his release in the early morning hours today, he was already on his podcast, War Room, which has been, of course, one of the primary sources of election denialism in the country. It's also one of the most popular, one of the largest following among political podcasts. And in an era when conservative media doesn't have the giants like Rush Limbaugh anymore in the audio space, guys like Steve Bannon have filled that vacuum and now carry a tremendous amount of influence and power in the MAGA sphere. What I expect to see from Bannon, what I heard from him when I interviewed him right after he was released this morning, is he's focused on closing the deal, helping Donald Trump close the deal with voters. I think that they realize, as Bannon does in the Trump campaign, the election is extremely close. They're not taking anything for granted. And the way that they see closing that deal is to focus on the economy and show voters, convince them that what Trump did when he was president put them in a better off financial condition, that things weren't as expensive and life was generally better. And so I think that's kind of the positive messaging that you can expect to see from them. Now, on the flip side of that, I think that's up to Trump. And he is always so unpredictable and so volatile and cannot help but put his foot in his mouth in delicate moments like this when he needs to be on his best behavior. So really, it's up to him how disciplined his campaign is for the next week.
So, Vaughn, you've talked to Steve Bannon before. You've interviewed Steve Bannon before. But Mike Davis told the New York Times that Bannon would come out of prison a week before the election like a roaring, caged lion. What do you make of what we heard on his podcast, and what's your expectation?
Right. Jeremy's been on the front lines of tracking Steve Bannon's trajectory up until this point. And I go back to a conversation I had him with Steve Bannon the day before he went into prison for this 4-month sentence. And it went back to 2020 and his efforts to overturn the election. He had 4 phone calls on January 5th and January 6th with Donald Trump, which he refused to tell the January 6th Select Committee members what the contents of that call were. He refused to tell me what the contents of that call were, but he's been open that he was in fact trying to keep Donald Trump installed as president in 2021 by forcing several electors from several states to not be certified by Mike Pence and have therefore the U.S. House vote for the next president. And because of the makeup of the House at the time, they would therefore, in his mind, select Donald Trump. And that's what takes us here to going toward the future. Because for Steve Bannon, I'm told that come election day, he is going to be at the Willard Hotel, which is where he was on January 6th. He has been instrumental in keeping all of these MAGA world allies to Donald Trump together and in cahoots to ensure that Donald Trump is able to get back into power. I want to let you listen to a part of his podcast just a bit ago.
On November 5th, we have to crush them at the ballot box. All that matters right now in places like Pennsylvania and in Michigan and in Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, obviously other states, but these 7 battleground states, is to deliver something that takes us to where Ohio and Florida are today. We have to put this beyond their ability to steal it.
And where Bannon is trying to win this election is by getting those Trump faithful supporters and turning them into Trump voters. Because Steve Bannon, really dating back now the last 2 years, was on the front line of the strategy. The way that Donald Trump wins this election is not so much by convincing women voters to come back to the Republican Party or winning over the independent voters or the suburban voters, but instead to juice that turnout of the rural, perhaps non-college educated white part of the electorate, and
get literally every Donald Trump
supporter to the polls, and a few more black and Latino voters, and then you win the election. That has been Steve Bannon's strategy, and we're seeing the Trump campaign now deploying that here in these final days.
Yeah, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Jeremy, but I wonder what his thoughts are if that doesn't turn out to be, crush them at the ballot box. If that doesn't happen, if Donald Trump finds he has similar numbers to 2020, or he just loses by whatever margin. What role does Steve Bannon play? What did he say today?
When I spoke to Steve, I asked him, as the person who first and foremost suggested that Trump deny the results of the election on election night in 2020, Steve was the guy who said Trump should go out there and declare victory no matter what the numbers say. I said to Steve, will you suggest that Trump do that again? He said if he thinks, Trump thinks that he has the numbers that he had in 2020, he absolutely should get up there and say, I won. And that will set in motion, depending on the outcome of the election, if indeed Trump has not won, a course just like we saw in 2020, where Donald Trump does not accept the fact that he lost, does not accept the results as they have been certified and validated. So that is a pretty precarious and, quite frankly, dangerous situation to be facing, even before election day. And we're talking about, a guy here who in 2016, Trump was not saying that he would accept the results of the election when he was asked. So, I think at this point, we shouldn't expect Trump to do anything reasonable or rational, because everything that we have seen points to one reaction from Donald Trump in his history, and that is if he is losing, someone else has to be cheating. And I see no reason that won't be the outcome, regardless of what the votes say on Election Day.
Jeremy Peters, I know you were up overnight to get that picture and to talk to Steve Bannon, so I thank you for staying up to be with us. Vaughn Hilliard, as always, thank you so much.
Simple advice from former President Barack Obama: do not cast your vote for a politician who thinks that you do not matter. Impactful words as the political shockwaves from the racist comment about Puerto Rico spewed at Donald Trump's pre-approved messaged rally in New York City over the weekend continue to reverberate in an impactful way. Politico has new reporting about how those heinous comments are being felt heavily in the must-win state of Pennsylvania. It is home to the third largest Puerto Rican population in the United States. Norberto Dominguez, a precinct captain with the local Democratic Party in Allentown, said this, quote, "It is spreading like wildfire through the community. It is not the smartest thing to do, to insult people, a large group of voters here in a swing state, and then go to their home asking for votes," he said. And yet, of course, that's exactly what the disgraced ex-president is about to do. In 2 hours' time, Trump is holding a rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania, a city with a large Latino population. Politico also spoke with Victor Martinez, an Allentown resident who owns the Spanish-language radio station La Mega. He said of Puerto Rican voters in the area, quote, "If we weren't engaged before, we are all paying attention now." He added that the morning radio show he hosts was chock full of callers on Monday, sounding off about the Trump rally comments, including a Puerto Rican Trump supporter who's now telling people not to vote for the former president. just 1 week out from Election Day, and the reaction to this gross remark has been strong. A crush of Puerto Rican celebrities, including J-Lo, Ricky Martin, Bad Bunny, and Mark Anthony, have all put support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. Take a look at the video Mark Anthony put out, reminding us that comments like the one we heard on Sunday are not just out of the blue.
This is Mark Anthony. Even though some have forgotten, I remember what it was like when Trump was president. I remember what he did and he said about Puerto Rico, about our people.
Puerto Rico.
I remember after Hurricane Maria devastated our island, Trump blocked billions in relief while thousands died. I remember when our families lacked clean water and electricity, Trump threw paper towels and called Puerto Rico dirty and poor. I was not surprised, because I also remember that he launched his campaign by calling Latinos criminals and rapists. He told us what he'll do. He'll separate children from their families and threaten to use the army to do it. This election goes way beyond political parties. Let's remember what the United States represents and stands for. United, regardless of where we're from. I am Mark Anthony, and I remember. That's why I support Kamala Harris for president.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Wow. Puerto Rico's largest newspaper, El Nuevo Dia, just endorsed Harris, saying the island has an ally in the vice president, and the Archbishop of San Juan de Puerto Rico called upon Trump to disavow the comments and personally apologize for them. We won't hold our breath. He's not a big apologizer, but we'll see if he does it. We'll be watching tonight in Allentown. It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Victor Martinez, the Allentown radio host, who was quoted in that great piece of reporting from Politico, joins us. Former chief Republican strategist and senior advisor for the Lincoln Project, Stuart Stevens, joins us. And with me at the table, Democratic strategist Aisha Mills is back. Victor, let me start with you. Just take me through more of the calls that you got this morning. It's probably the most treasured piece of data or information that we can get our hands on.
Well, listen, the callers yesterday and today have been clear. They are upset. They are mad. They cannot believe that this was said on such a stage that any country could be called trash. And then for us Puerto Ricans, then, of course, Puerto Rico. So they're angry. They're upset, and they cannot believe it.
You know, what's interesting to me, having covered the Trump story for 9 years, is that, Trump has called countries shithole countries. Donald Trump has talked about separating children, and when confronted with the horror of an infant's squeal, said that the horror is the deterrent. You know, he never backs down. He never apologizes. Are you expecting him to apologize tonight for his political purpose, and do you think people will buy it?
Well, number one, no, I don't expect him to apologize. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I specifically asked my audience this morning that. I told my audience, okay, so if all of a sudden Trump finds God and decide that he wants to apologize or take back or distance himself from those comments, would it be okay? Would you take it? My audience overwhelmingly said no, too late. Some of them even said the train has left the station. He could have done it Sunday. He could have done it Monday. He could have even done it this morning, and yet he didn't. I had a listener who was very interesting, because she called and she said, I followed Trump on Truth Social, and he found time yesterday at 2 o'clock. She was very specific. At 2 o'clock to go to Truth Social and criticize Fox News for having Michelle Obama on the air. But yet he hasn't found time to go to Truth Social and distance himself or apologize for what happened in his rally. So those are the type of comments that I'm getting from the audience, who obviously are now very engaged. And I will give you two pieces of breaking news. Major Puerto Rican superstar Don Omar, who has been part of the Fast and the Furious movies, and he's a very well-known artist, just posted on his social media, Puerto Rico is my homeland and my identity, and today more than ever I raise my island's flag in pride. It's time to turn the page. We are not going back, supporting Kamala Harris. And another piece of breaking news, Jennifer Gonzalez, the Puerto Rico representative in Washington, and now also candidate for governor in Puerto Rico, a strong Trump supporter, just now in Puerto Rico television said that these comments will cost Donald Trump in the state where Puerto Ricans live.
I was on the air when Donald Trump made his trip to the island after it was devastated. And we focus a lot on the moment, right? Sort of throwing like T-shirts at a baseball game, the paper towel into the audience. But the substance of what he said and did was just as lacking in empathy or understanding that these are our fellow Americans and they're suffering mightily. Do you, and there's so much that's been made about the inroads that Donald Trump has made in the Latino community. Do you think that this crystallizes who he really is and moves someone from Trump to Harris? Or do you think it just suppresses the Trump vote?
No, absolutely. I think that this has energized and activated the Puerto Rican community like never before. You spoke about Hurricane Maria and what happened when he went to Puerto Rico. You know, they say time heals all, you know, wounds. And I think time has passed. And even though we were upset with what happened after Hurricane Maria, we kind of just, you know, we let it go. What happened on Sunday has brought back all those feelings. What happened on Sunday reminded us, oh, wait a minute, that's right. This is the guy who threw the paper towels. This is the guy who said that we were poor and dirty. This is the guy who wanted to trade us in like a used car. This is a guy who withheld funding approved by Congress to help us in the most needed time of our lives. Oh, and now he's calling us trash. And the reason why I say he's calling us trash, even though he didn't say it himself, is because the fact that, because he hasn't denounced it, because he hasn't distanced himself from it, he's obviously then agreeing with it. It's like if he said it himself. Because if I don't want someone to speak on my behalf, I will absolutely put a stop to it. And he hasn't done it yet, and we don't think he's going to do it. So it's very interesting. And one more thing, I made a comment to another interview that I was doing that I said this was like a gift from the gods. What are the chances that Kamala Harris is at a Puerto Rican restaurant in Philadelphia the same day, at the same time that this is happening in the Trump rally in New York? What are the chances that a week before, Kamala Harris put out that Mark Anthony spot that you played about reminding us what happened during Hurricane Maria, and this happens on Sunday at the Trump rally in New York?
You know, because Trump is running to stay out of jail, I personally am always on alert for him to say and do anything. So in case he does, let me just play some of his remarks from the wake of Hurricane Maria. This is back in October 2017.
I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack. Every death is a horror. But if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. Now, what is your death count as of this moment? 17?
16 certified.
16 people certified. 16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people, all of our people working together. 16 versus literally thousands of people. You can be very proud.
I don't even know what to say about someone who's like, meh. What would we come in at? 16 dead? I mean, what? It's unbelievable.
I'm glad you played that audio, because I was talking about that this morning. There was a report that I found on NPR from September of that year, where George Washington University published a report where they were able to corroborate that there was 2,900 people that died because of the Hurricane Maria, because of the lack of medical services, because of lack of power, all due because of the hurricane. But it's not just that. After Maria, there was a second hurricane that came in months later. After that second hurricane, there was earthquakes. We all remember the earthquakes that were happening for some reason in Puerto Rico for like 2 or 3 weeks, every single day, 2 or 3 times a day. During that entire time, during that entire process, the Trump administration was withholding funding already approved by Congress to to help Puerto Rico and the people in need.